A few days ago, the rumor that Kagurabachi anime is finally closed came back, and yes, I say came back because 2 years ago we already had the news that Kagurabachi was getting an anime adaptation, with even the studio name. But now, the news resurfaced again, mainly because in just a few days there's going to be a jump event where Kagurabachi will be present, and most likely that's where we will finally get the official confirmation. But even though it's not official confirmed yet, I want to talk about what the Kagurabachi anime could be, and also why it took so long, because the original rumor came out in 2024, and the anime isn't expected until next year. So a lot of people are thinking if they were already working on the anime back then, what exactly were they doing all this year? So that is what we're going to break down in this video. And, like I mentioned at the beginning, a few days ago, the rumor that Kagurabachi is getting an anime adaptation started again. And again, this is one of those rumors that everyone already knew. It was obvious the popularity Kagurabachi had, sooner or later it was going to get an anime. But what's interesting here is how we had this leak for so long and nothing happened. We have to talk about that the current situation of Kagurabachi is completely different from what it was back in 2024. At that time, it had very few chapters. It was still building its identity as a manga, and in the West, its popularity came mostly from memes rather than the story itself. So when the leak came out in 2024 saying that the anime was in the works, a lot of people didn't believe it, because it just didn't make sense. It felt too early, too rushed, completely out of sync with how the industry usually works. And that's where something really interesting happened. The leak was never officially denied, but it was never confirmed either. It just stayed there. And over time, more small pieces of information started appearing, but nothing big enough for everyone to be completely sure that the anime was actually happening. At the same time, the longer time passed, the more sense the original leak started to make. 2 years ago, it felt too early, but as months went by, it started to feel more and more real. The problem is that because the original leak came out so early, almost off of timing, people's perception never really changed. A lot of people still didn't believe it, until now, when the leak came back with actual details like production, studio, and even release window. Now, understanding all of this, we need to look at why 2 years ago the leak didn't make sense, because even though everything fit now, back then it was kind of crazy to think about a Kagurabachi anime. The manga barely started, it didn't have enough material, and more importantly, it didn't have what producers are always looking for: stability. When it comes to adapting manga into anime, it's not just about being popular in the moment. The industry doesn't run on hype. Producers need to see if that popularity can last over time, if the sales stay strong, if the community keeps growing, or if it was just a temporary trend. And 2 years ago, Kagurabachi was still way too new to answer any of those questions. If we look at other Shonen Jump titles like Boku no Hero or Jujutsu Kaisen, even those didn't get an anime adaptation immediately. They have to go through a consolidation phase, proving they weren't just a temporary hit and that they could sustain their popularity over time. Because at the end of the day, producing an anime isn't cheap, it's not fast, and it's definitely not something done lightly. It's an investment, and every investment tries to minimize risk, and that's exactly where Kagurabachi didn't fit 2 years ago. It had too few chapters, which is already a big issue. It's not the same adapting a story with 200 chapters as it is adapting one that barely has enough material for a single season. That can lead to pacing issues, filler, or adaptations that run out of content too quickly, and producers try to avoid that at all cost. But beyond the content, there was also the perception. In the West, Kagurabachi was mainly known for memes. It was viral, yes, but not necessarily solid. A lot of people knew about it, but not everyone was actually reading, and that raised an important question. How does that popularity translate into real consumption? Because it's one thing for a manga to trend online and a completely different thing to sell volumes and build a loyal fanbase. Even in Japan, it was still a new manga, and in the Japanese industry, there is a very clear trend. Wait for a series to build up volume, to prove consistency. That's why we see more and more adaptation of manga that have been running for years, because that gives production committees security. So, going back to 2 years ago, when that leak appeared, the reaction was obvious. It didn't make sense. Not because the series didn't have potential, but because it was too early. It skipped all the usual steps. It was building on something that hadn't fully proven itself yet, and that's why people didn't believe it. Not because the leak was wrong, but because the timing felt off. It was information that seemed impossible within the logic of the industry. But now, looking back, it doesn't seem crazy at all. It just means the project was already in motion much earlier than anyone expected. and everything that didn't make sense 2 years ago makes perfect sense now. And that's the more interesting part of the whole situation, because the leak didn't change, the context did. 2 years later, Kagurabachi is no longer in that early, uncertain stage. Now it has progression, a foundation, and most importantly, something that the industry values above all else: consistency. Today, Kagurabachi has more chapters, more development, more characters, and most importantly, enough material to build an adaptation without worrying about running out. That might sound basic, but it's crucial. Now you can plan a season with proper pacing, a clear structure, and without needing to stretch or invent content. The anime can be built on something real and not just potential. And beyond the content, the perception has changed. Kagurabachi is no longer just the meme manga. That was the entry point, but over time it became something more. A lot of people came in because of the memes, but they stayed because of the story, and that translates into something that actually matters: real consumption. Now there are sales, real interest, and a community that expects much more. In Japan, which is the main market, Kagurabachi has also established itself as one of the strongest new series in the magazine. It's no longer a temporary trend, it's a series that proves it can last, and that's exactly what producers need to see before moving forward with an anime. What used to be a risky is now a logical investment. They're no longer building something new, they're investing in something that already proved itself, and that changed everything, because what felt rushed years ago now feels completely reasonable. And then there's the studio factor. As mentioned before, the project will be handled by Seigen Pictures, a studio that already showed an incredibly high level in its production. This doesn't look like an anime being rushed just to capitalize on hype. It looks like a long-term project, with proper planning time and a strong team behind it. That's why the release is set all the way for next year. At the end of the day, what's more interesting isn't that Kagurabachi is getting an anime, because that was inevitable. What stands out is how it happened, the timing, the way it was leaked, and how the public perception evolved over time. A project that leaked 2 years ago now fit perfectly. The manga grew, stabilized, built a fan base, accumulated content, and now meets every condition expected for an adaptation.